Greetings and happily Family Day 2024 to all of you accursed. Whether you or they know it or not, Curse of Politics panel is family to me. I'm Patriarch Herle. Scott Reid didn't spring from my loins, but he and I go together like 2 ounces of lemon heart rum and a tall, cool glass of Coke. Jordan Leichnitz is the Friedrich Ebert stiff-tongued social democratic daughter I never had. And Kory Teneycke is my hell of a lot more affluent, Sasky stubble-jumping cousin. You guys, you having a good weekend without me?
Yeah. As I was just mentioning off air, I'm on my own this week because Nicole's down in Nicaragua at a yoga retreat. So I've been teaching my youngest son, Fred, how to cook this weekend. That's been the Family Day weekend experience. So
he's got the chili dog down pat. That would be the key.
Well, chili dog is the most important, but we did mashed potatoes and a beef roast, and we did a pork tenderloin and pasta.
You're doing God's work,
trying to
Kory.
get all the little
good.
basics down in anticipation that someday he won't have me around to cook for him. So,
Scott, I had to fill in for you on question period. Where the hell were you this weekend?
I spent Family Day fully immersed in family. We had a hockey tournament, so all the families for the hockey team, my 14-year-old son's hockey team. So we were in downtown Montreal. We were playing hockey out in Pierrefonds, and then we bus back to downtown. We went to the Habs game on Saturday night, watched a very close loss, unfortunately, to the Caps. But it was, super fun. We did not play very good hockey. We had a lot of fun. We just did not play well. And then we had an 8-hour bus ride home in the snowstorm, where it looked like basically if you got through Brockville, you were eligible to star in a Mad Max film because it was gruesome out there.
8 hours on a bus, eh?
8 hours on a bus.
99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of
Scott's
beer.
got more stamina than I do.
8 hours on a bus sounds as fun as getting up at 6 a.m. to do yoga. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I'm liking my weekend most.
You guys,
18,
I went out and skated
14-year-olds.
on the canal. I'm going to say skated with air quotes, but the canal finally reopened again in Ottawa. So the ice was just atrocious. So we basically went out and took 3 steps and said, okay, we're done now. But it was nice to be out there. I was worried we weren't going to get another crack at it this season.
That's the curse of Rideau Canal, though, is when it's nice to go skating, the ice sucks. And when the ice is good, it's too friggin' cold.
Yeah, it's always the way.
All right, kids, here's the pod this week. We're going to talk about the ArriveCan app, talking about the politics of scandal investigations. I expect Reid has something to say about this. Our cursed clipping is Susan Delacourt's piece in the Toronto Star on whether the confidence and supply agreement, although I've recently learned that in Ottawa, they call it the Supply and Confidence Agreement. It actually has an acronym called SACA.
Or
SACA.
CASA,
You know that?
depending on...
I sometimes use Saka in my in recipes when I don't want to just accept sugar. You know, like it's a good substitute. A little Saka, and you just mix it up. It dissolves in water.
Yeah.
It's not to be confused with the Japanese wine, rice wine.
No, it's not.
I guess we'll see if this one dissolves in water, huh?
Yeah. So anyway, Susan wrote about that thing and whether it should carry on or not. We'll talk about that, and then we'll break down Stephen Guilbeault's lane changes on new road infrastructure and the Liberal government's climate change legacy. And finally, the great Gordon Pinsent will call out for our Hey You. So it's great to be with you. We've caught up on our weekends. So let's get straight to this bloody ArriveCan thing. Okay, Jordan, what is the story here? Is this a story of incompetence or is this a story of corruption? And on whose part? The government officials or the ministers responsible? What is the story here? How am I supposed to follow this?
Yeah, well, I don't know that we know the full story yet. And I think all we know at this stage is that it is majorly no bueno for several people at minimum who were involved at the departmental level. I think at this point, something that is notable about this is that there's been no tie to the political level. So there's no indication at this stage of the game that the minister's office was at all aware or involved of what's going on, which I'm sure comes as a great relief to to those folks. But unfortunately, I do think it still has political ramifications because the story is such that the more digging happens, the more we're seeing some really unsavory practices that appear to be quite illegal, potentially. And this is really we're just at the beginning of this. We know the RCMP is involved. So there's a number of investigations. There's going to be more information to come out. And unfortunately for the government, this is the kind of thing that can stick. It's a story about what happened on their watch. This is about competence. This is about oversight. And the timing really is not great for them on this. I think it's just the type of negative story around spending that they don't need. And, I think the other thing that strikes me just when I look at the totality of the story is that it's also a little bit of story about what's happened to the public service, right? We've had a public service that's growing, but we've also seen huge growth in contracting out. And so clearly there has become a culture here where this did not raise red flags. And that is majorly problematic, that the level and the degree of contracting out that was happening here, again, to an agency, those who've been following the story will know that did not actually do the work itself. They were just in turn subcontracting out.
They just know how to get contracts, right,
That's
Jordan?
Right.
That's their specialty.
So,
is they know how to
very
get
good, very specialized and very good at it.
Yeah, well, and so the fact that we've birthed an ecosystem in Ottawa where like two guys out of a basement can scoop multi-million-dollar contracts and take 15 to 30% off the top just for finding the right contractors. Like, there's a real problem here culturally, I think, within at minimum within that department, but perhaps further than that is going to bear a lot of scrutiny as we go ahead. But yeah, I think this is not good news for the government. They are lucky so far that there's been no ties to the political level, but we'll see what happens. There could be more here.
Kory, peer inside the bureaucracy for me and tell me how this could possibly be a story of incompetence, because the incompetence is at a scale that is hard for me to imagine. So you start off with a contract that's supposed to be worth $80,000, and it ends up costing $60 million. As somebody said on social media, that's like going out to buy an F-150 and then getting a bill for $60 million, right? And so there must have been any number of blown past estimates that would have caused people to say, what the fuck is going on here? Maybe I need some approvals up. Maybe we need to reassess this. Like, how about when it hit $1 million, right? From 80,000, that's a pretty big jump. Like, how could this really be incompetence? It feels to me like money's has got to be sloshing around here somewhere.
Well, I think it can be both incompetent and potentially criminal. I guess we're going to see. But, once things start to balloon and when you think about what was going on at that time, like I think it's probably more a case of throwing good money after bad. But the volumes of money are so astounding. And the most egregious part of this is what Jordan referenced about, a two-person supplier taking huge commissions on this work for little to no value for the taxpayer that's discernible to me, and I think to most other people looking at it. Why wouldn't that have stopped at least? And so it looks like incompetence. If there is criminality, I'll be surprised if it touches the political level. This sounds like a self-licking ice cream cone inside the public service that between these contractors and the people who were deciding who the money went to. So, I hope they didn't spend all those commissions, because I imagine they're going to be having to give some back at some point around this. But yeah, like, it's incompetent. Are there political consequences? Sure. I think this government has had a competence deficit on a range of issues, and this is just another brick in the backpack that they're going to have to carry around with them from now till the next election, and it's not going to be a very fun experience. But I'm not sure we're going to see any direct ties to political figures, but I don't think that matters a whole lot in this case, because the scale of the thing is so off the charts.
Bread, yogurt, fruit and veg, clothing, consumer electronics. Prices for these items and almost everything else you use, wear, and eat have gone up and up and up these last few years. Inflationary times we live in. Yeah, I know. Duh. Anyway, however, there is a notable exception I've been talking about here. StatsCan Consumer Price Index shows us the wireless industry has been drastically cutting their prices over the last 5 years, as much as over 50% in the case of cellular. Yet, as the innovation economy marches forward, paired with these inflationary times, it means national carriers like our presenting sponsor TELUS are absorbing far higher costs to build infrastructure and innovate their technologies, even as they cut prices for services. And so we have what's known as diseconomies of scale and scope. Labor, equipment, materials, energy, all industry input costs have increased substantially, when averaged almost 3% during the past year, 9% since 2020. Breaking it down, key building materials like concrete and structural steel, up 55% and 53% since the first quarter of 2020. Electricity prices rose 8.2% year over year, as reported by StatsCan last November. And total labor costs increased by 17.3% from 2020 to 2023. Against this backdrop of higher input costs and much lower retail prices, you might think something has to give, eh? What's that old saw? Quality, price, and service. Pick two. Nope. The quality of Canada's networks is world-leading. Full stop. Virtually all of us have access to wireless, including more than 97% of rural Canadians. And over 85% have access to 5G, with speeds of up to 250 megabits per second on standard plans and 2 gigabits per second on 5G+. That far surpasses our neighbors to the south. We didn't get there by chance, Hurley-Burleyites. Carriers like TELUS invested in these outcomes, creating massive economic benefit for the country. We'll talk more about that next week. Scott, what do you think the political fallout is?
I think when it happened is really important. It's coming at a point where the government is laying on the ground, unable to raise its hands up to protect its face from being kicked. And that's the big problem here. So it's true that it would be far worse if it was linked to the political level. But the government wears it, and the government is limited in its ability to protect itself from the reputational damage, or perhaps even more severely, just the sense of continuity in the negativity, right? This just continues to, this fits as a piece with what I expect of this government, right? I mean, again, walk in any coffee shop, bus station, or bar, and you're going to hear people saying, $80,000 pay for a fucking app. That's a Trudeau way. And there's no point in grabbing that person saying, excuse me, sir, I'd actually just like to run through a few of the facts with you so that you understand that it actually has nothing to do with Justin Trudeau. That would be an unfair suggestion. That's going to get you far. So they're going to wear it. They're going to wear it. It's going to be unpleasant, and it has there are two profound risks, I think, with it. Profound's too dramatic. There are two forward risks with it. One is that we have no idea when we get to the end of this risk. And two, we don't know if the story gets worse. And obviously, if we went to the political realm, then it would get much worse. But that's not really even what I'm guessing at. I'm just like, does it get worse than a criminal charges are laid? Does it get worse than that? There's a more sort of broader suite of contracts were involved, and these guys were a nexus for a whole variety of things. And was there a small unit of people involved in contracting and procurement that were feeding this stuff out? And so it just dominates time, and all of it sort of just sticks to you as a culture.
And I got to say, the signs are not good. Like the fact that 2 people at the ADM level were suspended without pay and had their security clearances revoked, like that is not a common sight. So I think that that's indicative of the level of seriousness that early investigations have turned up here, which suggests to me that there's more coming for sure.
So that might mean that it was held from the political level, right? One of my questions would be why the deputy didn't at some point go to the minister and say, just FYI, this thing's up to $20 million now. And you're saying maybe the deputy didn't.
Some of those conversations likely occurred at some point. But, when you look at where I think the biggest impact of this is going to be, I would tie it to the suggestion that you guys have been making around going after Poilievre on what would you cut. And this notion that you can't find any savings in the federal budget, This is a pretty compelling proof point for Poilievre to trot out anytime the Liberals say, "Oh, well, you're not going to be able to find any savings in the federal budget." Oh yeah, well, why don't we start by not spending $60 million on an app? Why don't we, and it's very difficult for people to believe that that's the only instance of this that's going on in the federal government. When you look at the amount of money that's flowing out the door to consultants of various sorts, you got to think there's more egregious stuff out there, and this is communicates very easily, and I think it's a great counterpoint to what I think one of the most likely attacks coming at Poilievre is going to be.
Well, and also even on an identified problem, right? Which is the over-reliance on consultants. Like, we've been through the song and dance about KPMG, and this is, I think, for many voters, like, this is just like further proof that there's a small group of people who are well connected, who are able to line their pockets very successfully with this government.
Yeah, the narrative sort of tells itself, and the asterisks on it about it not being at the political level, like I say, may limit it from being a complete bonfire, but it's still burning them. I want to take it in a slightly different direction, David, and just I want to be like extraordinarily defensive, as I usually am, and I'll speak on both your behalf and mine. I think there's an interesting question about how the government responds at the political level to this, and it poses a dilemma for you immediately if you're the government. So if you say to yourself, well, we didn't have anything to do with this. If this is corruption, it was corruption that was acting independently of us. It was bureaucratic corruption. It was, because typically these kinds of things happen, even when it's bureaucratically centered. It's bureaucrats get wired in with somebody at the political level, usually through the political operation, independent of political staff. They see who their political masters use and like and want. They go to those folks, and then they set that, and it's a triangle of malfeasance. That doesn't appear to be the case here. The government might be tempted to say, look, we want to make it crystal clear we had nothing to do with this, and be condemning, and we're going to put in place this 7-point action plan and be really, really, really loud and tear the shirt, as they say in French, about this. And I'm going to get defensive because people will say, oh, sure, and then do what Paul Martin did. We had to do that. Okay, so that was the only answer. It wasn't the right answer. It was the only answer, I think, ultimately available to us, because we had to do something to separate ourselves from the demonstrated political connection of this thing and try to distinguish ourselves as a unique and relatively new regime, saying we weren't part of this, and we will therefore face a higher obligation to A, denounce it, and B, even though you may suspect that we want to make certain it just gets passed by, that we will condemn it no matter where it goes, and that we needed that. And I maintain that won us the 2004 election, or without it, we would have lost severely. I don't think the government currently is in the same position because of that lack of a political connection. I think that it runs a risk that that absence of that connection may tempt it to be louder. And I think that it
Scott,
will
I'm just going to stop you. I can't believe you've rambled down this road this long. I'm just going to stop you here, okay? So, there may be some people listening to this show that remember the movie Crocodile Dundee, okay? Well, this is not a scandal. That was a fucking scandal, okay?
Well, Crocodile Dundee 2 was a scandal. The first one actually was quite good.
No, this is not a knife. This is a knife scene is what I'm talking about. And the fucking sponsorship scandal, okay, by the time Paul Martin became prime minister, had already cost Chrétien 2 ministers. He'd had to fire 2 ministers of her. It was already a full blazing fire. Then the Auditor General comes out with her report, which in beautiful graphics links all the money going from all the taxpayer pots through all the Liberal hands down to Chrétien's friends and political organization in Quebec, lays that all out in stunning glory. The Liberal Party lost 20 points of voting intention over 72 fucking hours, okay? If we hadn't said it was only the fact that people were inclined to believe that Paul Martin wasn't involved, and he had to reinforce that by saying, I'm going to get to the very fucking bottom of it, that allowed us to even survive and win the 2004 election. And by the way, for all of you listening, Chrétien would have been destroyed in that election. So that the two situations are not remotely analogous. in the sense
Gotcha.
that this government's not on fire over this issue at all. It's a minor annoyance compared to sponsorship.
See, Jordan? See, Kory? See how defensive we can be? David becomes sharp-tongued and fierce. I become long-winded and rambly.
I feel like we need a trigger warning on this episode.
Yeah.
But the point is this. The point is the government may convince itself that because this isn't sponsorship and didn't have itself rooted at the political level, that gives them permission to be voluble in their response. And I would say it's the exact opposite. They're going to have to be measured in their condemnation of this, even though it is going to stick to them, because the louder they yell, the more they're going to invite the association. It's a real fucking prick of a situation.
So there's a trendy name out there for speed, particularly in baseball. Cognoscenti used the term velo, a clunky abbreviation of velocity. There is the velo of the pitched ball, which can come at the batter faster than 90 miles an hour. And there's the velo of the ball, once it cracks against a well-swung bat and abruptly changes direction. Velo is tracked by special radar, and baseball fans track the stats obsessively. You can go look it up. Pitchers are criticized when their velo drops by even a minuscule amount over a season. And it's not just baseball. Velo is a thoroughly modern metric. Our sponsor, CN, carefully monitors the velocity of its trains, although, freight trains and baseballs are different things measured differently. In train parlance, velocity means the number of miles a train travels in an average day. The faster, the better. But boosting a train's velo doesn't mean stepping harder on the accelerator. You can't just do that. There are speed limits. Rather, it means ensuring there are fewer unnecessary pauses or slowdowns along the route, that lower priority trains have been shunted off to a siding to allow for quick passage, that the train spends less time sitting needlessly in stations, that all the train's navigational and safety systems are inspected and running perfectly. And of course, there's the big one, making sure the train leaves the station on time every time, period. Simple, right? But huge and crucial. CN has been relentlessly focusing on all those things in the past couple of years, and their train's velo is higher than it has been in many years. That means reliability, and reliability makes everybody happy. Shippers, customers, shareholders, investors, and CN's railroaders themselves. As I have said here many times before, cargo has to move, and you got to have velo. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to fun times with Jordan and the NDP.
And fun times with the red team too, guys. Everyone's having fun.
Fun times. So here's what Susan wrote in the Toronto Star. That's where we come to the more strategic considerations for both sides on whether they want the deal to continue. The should it last question. For Liberals, this is mostly a no-brainer. The collapse of the deal may not precipitate an immediate election, but it makes Trudeau's minority more precarious. And judging from all the polls, odds are that an election could turn out badly for the Liberals. If election avoidance is the only issue, the New Democrats would be similarly motivated to keep the deal going. They may have limited clout as the fourth party in the House of Commons right now, but they would have zero influence, one assumes, in a Pierre Poilievre government. But two former leaders of the NDP have openly questioned in recent months the wisdom of the party attaching its fortunes too closely to the Trudeau Liberals. In one of his last interviews before his death last month, Ed Broadbent told the CBC's Rosemary Barton, maybe if the agreement were a year shorter, it might be a little better. This week, former leader Thomas Mulcair said on CTV that it was time for the... By the way, is there a former leader in the planet more former than Tom Mulcair? But in any event, said on CTV that it was time for the NDP to walk away from the Liberals too. I think that they have to draw that line in the sand and then say the deal is done. They've got to show some autonomy to the Liberals. All right, Scott, to loop back to our first conversation, when Leighton voted against us in the House finally, he did so on the basis of the sponsorship scandal, not on the basis of any policy dispute. He wanted to bring down the government, not on a policy issue, because his voters, frankly, would have been surprised that the government was being defeated on a policy question. So he defeated us on a corruption matter. What's the right issue for the NDP to break with Trudeau on?
Oh, I think think Tom may be right. I think actually, sorry, sprinkle me in salt and roll me around. I just think, I think for them to say we couldn't come to grips on, they weren't serious enough about pharmacare. And I think that might give them a point of principle. And so maybe there's some benefit in that, that they're fighting for the program that they think their voters want. And they can use that as an example that the Liberals are not the fence straddlers of NDP Liberal territory that you might think, and they're trying to insulate themselves from the pending squeeze play that will occur in the next federal election when Liberals go, please, NDP, like fucking Polyev, okay? Come on. Just, stick with us. So I think there's some merit in that. I continue to believe, we've talked about this before in different settings. Perhaps I'm confusing the podcast with sitting on a bar stool, but I know we've talked about this. I sort of think that this breach may be necessary for all concerned. I know that, like, Susan's piece seems to clearly hint that they're striving toward a compromise and that they will pull some kind of patchwork out before March 1st. But I would say that I think that, as lump in the throat as it is to take this plunge and say, oh my God, we could get out of this thing and force ourselves into an election, could end up with dominoes falling, and we could end up in an election in 2024 or something like that. I still think for the Liberals, it frees them. They can still manage their way around a confidence vote around the budget. They can engineer House matters so that they're not vulnerable except for maybe once or twice in the next 18 months. And I think that they should be inclined to do that, because then it's a precondition. Kory's made this point over and over and over again. I think it's a precondition for the Liberals to regain control of their own agenda, because otherwise this agreement is your agenda, and it really runs the risk of being alienating to middle-class voters. It works for the NDP as a platform. It doesn't work for the Liberals as a platform in the next election, is what I mean. So there's all of that. Last thing I would say, I had this weird thought. I wonder if they do patch up a deal, if they'll come out of it and say, and the election will be held on X day. Like, I wonder, I wonder if they'll say, let's actually give Canadians a timetable so they get off our ass about the fact that this is just propping up the Liberal government. I would suspect that the Liberals wouldn't be willing to do that, but I think that would be an interesting demand for the NDP. I might say to them, I want to include an election date.
Jordan, a lot of this depends on NDP strategy. So there's a pretty sharp fork in the road, it feels to me, for the NDP right now, because what they're looking at in public opinion is that they have members of their current caucus who are vulnerable to losing to Conservatives in the next election, and there are Liberal seats that the NDP could pick up in the next election. They're different kinds of seats, and they require different kinds of strategies to hold the current caucus versus gain those Liberal, almost exclusively downtown urban seats, right? How's the NDP going to manage that two-pronged approach?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right about the crossroads. And like, this weekend is literally the crossroads. This is, from everything I understand, a lot of ultimatums were delivered last week when it became pretty clear that the Liberals were not understanding that Singh was serious about potentially pulling the plug. So, I think there was a bit of a scramble towards the end of the week.
Just to be a troublemaker, can you tell me exactly how that ultimatum is framed, and phrased? Does it sort of if you don't give us what we want on pharmacare, we won't defeat you? I mean, what is the threat? The
threat is that they walk away from the agreement. But I think that, as we talked about before, at the moment, the Liberals need the agreement more than the NDP does. For the NDP, this is, to a degree, whatever they can get out of the Liberals is all gravy from their position as fourth party in this particular parliament. But for the Liberals, I think it's a bit more existential, because while it's true that they can cobble together support to get through the next 18 months on an ad hoc basis, everyone on this call knows that that's a much more labor intensive and precarious way to govern than what they currently have right now. And I think that and I'll talk about the NDP strategy, but the thing I think that's actually really interesting about this particular crossroads is I think it's also a crossroad about Trudeau and about his position and his leadership, because the deal provides him personally as leader with some certainty over the next few months. And I think if the deal is gone, I think his own position within the Liberal Party becomes actually much more tenuous heading into the next election. But I would say, for the NDP, they need, they have to find a way, obviously, to circle the square for seats like Charlie Angus's. And I think the way they're doing that is they're going after anything that they can tie to pocketbook and affordability. They're trying to have that fight with Poilievre. Look, I think, as we've discussed many times before, and for me personally, pharmacare wasn't my very favorite litmus test for some of these things for many of the reasons we've discussed previously, which is that most Canadians don't, off the top of their head, think that this is an unmet need. But I actually think that the negotiations, as they've evolved, particularly over the last couple of weeks, to me, the NDP is actually getting more out of it than they would have if it was just a discussion about framework legislation. Because if you go back to the text of the agreement, that was initially all that was talked about, was that there was going to be framework legislation for pharmacare, which is the square root of fuck all for most people. But now the conversation is actually drilling down to a couple of very commonly used medications. So diabetes medication, contraceptive, people know what this is. Most people either take these or know someone who takes them.
This is a wedge with the Conservatives. This is not a policy move. That is not a policy move. That is a political wedge for the Conservatives.
Absolutely, but
I don't know whether it's an
NDP
NDP idea or a Liberal idea or both, but it is forcing Poilievre to vote against women's reproductive freedom,
and
right?
this is, but the beauty of this is exactly that. They've taken an issue that was not strategically, like the policy issue of pharmacare was not strategically terribly advantageous to them, and they're now shifting it into something that is much more useful. So I think that that's really smart. I think that actually if they're able to get this particular agreement, then they can come out and say that they actually delivered over and above what was in the original confidence and supply agreement. And then the worst news of all for Trudeau and the Liberals is that, like, the squeeze is not going to stop there. They're going to come back for something else next week. And then they're going to come back for something else after that. And they're going to continue to get everything they can out of this deal until the minute that the folks who have found a newfound love for fiscal restraint in cabinet, until those voices completely win out. And then at which point they'll walk away. But I think actually, given a lot of the criticisms that we've levied at the NDP around the agreement over the last few months, I think the way they're playing it right now, to me, is pretty smart. And I think gives them some wins either way. Either they get some stuff that they weren't going to get otherwise and provides them a political wedge, or they get out of the agreement on an issue that they feel that they can campaign on. And then they're able to create that distance with the government. But I think for them, not like well played, given the cards that they've been dealt. And we'll see what the impact is on Trudeau personally. That's actually something that I think could be a bit the sleeper issue within the confidence and supply agreement negotiations.
What do you mean? Just to expand on that. What do you mean?
Well, I just mean that the confidence and supply agreement is not important just in terms of government stability. I think it's also important in terms of Trudeau's leadership stability, because it's a bit of an insurance policy. It buys him time. It buys him runway in order to rehabilitate himself to run again. I don't think this is possible at this stage of the game, but clearly he and those immediately around him do. So they need all those things, frankly, far more than the NDP needs this agreement. If the agreement is gone and things proceed on a more case-by-case basis, I think that there's a potential that internal pressure could turn up on Trudeau to make a decision to stay or go, and that people could be looking down other paths when things become more unstable.
With a global push to phase out fossil fuels while meeting increased electricity demand, there is a growing recognition that while we need all sources of clean electricity to meet climate targets, there is no achievable path to net zero without nuclear power. Canada was one of more than 20 countries to sign a ministerial declaration to triple nuclear energy by 2050, recognizing the nuclear industry's importance in achieving global net zero targets and keeping the goal of limiting overall worldwide temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. Today's podcast sponsor, Bruce Power, one of the world's largest nuclear generating facilities, located in Tiverton, Ontario, is uniquely positioned to help Canada achieve its economic and climate change objectives between now and 2050. In coordination with the ministerial pledge, they joined 119 other nuclear industry signatories active in 140 countries worldwide in signing a net zero nuclear industry pledge to help achieve this lofty goal. This pledge is part of Bruce Power's ongoing commitment to support future clean energy targets by renewing its fleet through its life extension program and major component replacement projects, and investing in increasing net peak output from its existing assets. Because there's no net zero without nuclear. Kory, do you think that Poilievre has to support free birth control and morning after pills?
No, I don't think so. Look, this, that is a clever wedge, I think. And I think that's probably the best thing that they could get out of this. But if I were in the NDP caucus, I would be talking about something that you mentioned. If I was an MP in British Columbia, for instance, for the NDP, where I think they're going to lose at least half their seats. If I was Charlie Angus or somebody in Northern Ontario who's in the NDP caucus, I would be asking, what is this doing for me? I don't think they are defending their incumbent seats to the degree that if I were in that caucus, I would be demanding of them. Like, show me the data, how this is going to have me win in my riding. I think it's putting way too many eggs in that one basket, and I don't think it's going to deliver the win that they need with the voters that they're losing to the Conservatives. They can try to make this about birth control or something. Sure, that might be better for them, but I think it'd be better for them in downtown Toronto than it's going to be for the caucus members that they're going to lose. So I think it's inadequate in terms of protecting seats they hold, but I also think it's bad strategy for the NDP to be tied to the Liberal government in the way that they have been throughout this term of office. This is clearly setting up to be a change election. And in a change election, you don't want to be on the government side of the divide. You want to be on the opposition side of the divide and talking about how you're going to do things, differently and drawing more, separation between you and what is a very long in the tooth unpopular government. So I don't get that. And on the Liberal side, I don't think it makes sense for them either. Like, they are allowing the NDP through this agreement to call the tune. The agenda of the government has been too much about NDP voters in my mind. I think they have abandoned the center. I think that's why they're at 25 points in the polls. I would be looking at things around affordability. I know they're not going to take any of my advice on this, but I would be looking at pausing the consumer part of the carbon tax until the economy improves. I would be looking at doing things like that are going to deliver more money and relief to middle-class voters who are feeling cost of living pressure and worried about their mortgages and all of those things that we've talked about 100 times before. But instead, they're on all these niche side issues that are really about voter groups for the NDP, and on that, as I said, I don't even think they're the right issues for the NDP, to be honest.
Scott, the fucking verdict is coming in on the federal NDP, and it's coming in from New Democrats. It's coming in from the candidates for the leadership of the Alberta NDP. It's coming from the leader of the Saskatchewan NDP. All these places where people are competitive and trying to win. They can't fucking cut Singh off their leg fast enough. They are talking in Alberta about how, we're against the carbon tax and we believe in affordability issues and all this stuff. And we don't think you should have to buy a federal NDP membership now when you buy a provincial NDP membership. I mean, these are very, it's a third party, so it doesn't get focused on, but they are in chaos and crisis as a political party at the national level right now.
I think that's right. I think the NDP's in this at the federal levels in this really, really peculiar spot.
Not to mention, apparently, at least 10 points behind Crombie in Ontario by all polls. Right?
Yeah. I just think they're in this terrible spot, and this is what happens. This is why I think ultimately, and I know the merit of every day your prime minister is another day your prime minister, to quote Paul Wells quoting Stephen Harper. But to me, this confidence of supply agreement has become an anchor because it's fundamentally forged from weakness, right? For both parties, it's we are too weak to face the electorate. That's the unstated but absolutely understood foundation of it, and therefore we will do these other things and avoid political risk. And I just think that when you're operating from a position, when you are transparently and obviously and seen to be working from a position of political weakness, all that it causes you to harvest is weakness. And so that's why I think people are separating themselves from Singh. I think that's why the Liberals need to say the alternative may be dead dog risky, but this is certain doom. So manage your parliamentary agenda, manage around the budget, cut a deal on the budget with whatever you have to do, but don't cut an agenda in whole with the NDP any longer. And I also think the NDP, last thing, just to your explicit question, I think that the NDP, it's not just federal, provincial, and do they aspire to be government? Do they not aspire to be government? That, how much are they focused on climate identity issues versus how much are they focused on sort of more middle class and all those kinds of things? I think that Singh is a leader that no one believes is ever going to improve their fundamental fortunes, and he's therefore on his last lap, and there's no fear of him. There's no intense dislike for him, but there's no fear of him. There's no affinity for him. I don't get anything by being associated with him. I don't lose anything by cutting him loose. And I don't have any particular reason to be connected with him. And so there's just no leverage there.
Recently, we have heard from our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, with fresh new ideas on how Queen's Park can implement policies to end Ontario's housing crisis. For example, OREA is asking decision makers to modernize zoning rules to support the conversion of commercial real estate space to residential housing to provide more affordable housing for Ontario families. What does this mean? The pandemic created a dramatic shift in how our retail sector operates. Many businesses shifted online, and sadly, many were forced to close. This has created an opportunity for the creation of new places for people to live in spaces that had previously been retail spaces. Think of those empty office towers downtown and the vacant strip mall in the suburb. OREA is asking the province to legislate the ability for accelerated conversion of these commercial spaces to residential housing and to overrule any local bylaws that prohibit this conversion. This would create affordable housing options, allowing more families to afford a home. Remember, Hurley-Burleyites, bold action builds homes. To read OREA's full report on how Ontario can end the housing crisis, go to orea.com/advocacy/housing-supply. Jordan, it would be unfair not to give you a chance to respond.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, me think you doth protest too much. I think I mean, having lived through the party in several states of disarray and crisis at the federal level, I would not rate this moment as the highest on that list. Let's put it that way. Certainly not in the last decade. I think that to bring it back to the example that kicked you off, which is the debate in the Alberta leadership race about affiliation with the federal party. I mean, look, it's in the middle of a leadership race. Like, not all candidates agree on that. That's a point of discussion. But I think it would be difficult to find a provincial section across the country that could successfully run their campaign with zero assistance from the federal party. Like, the integration at an organizational level remains very high. So I think that if you're a leadership candidate looking to make a splash, then this is perhaps a conversation that would come up. But it's not one that regular NDP members in Alberta are necessarily bringing to the fore. And I think it's not one that actually would, in practice, particularly serve any of those provincial sections. The reality is that when provinces, and we're talking mostly about prairie provinces, want to take some distance from the federal party, they take some distance. They go out and they do that. And so I think that has largely worked fairly well for them as they need to over the last few years. And I doubt you're going to see anyone actually move ahead to change that. But as for whether this agreement is forged out of weakness, well, yeah, sure. But that, that's politics, is taking your weakness and turning it into a position of strength. And again, you show me another fourth party who is leading the government on in the way that Singh has been able to do through this agreement. Now, is that a magical silver bullet for his electoral fortunes in an election where he's likely to be heavily squeezed? But no, of course it's not, right? It's not sufficient unto itself, but neither is it a weak basis when you compare it to some of the other potential scenarios there. So I think you got to play the cards you're dealt, and they continue to try to make the best out of this situation. We'll see what happens if they're able to squeeze something out of this negotiation. But I maintain if they get something tangible that's an actual real life benefit to people that they can experience before the next election, that's much better than the alternative. And I think that still there's a lot more in this for them than there is, there's a lot more in this for the Liberals at the moment in terms of the stability and more need there than there is for the New Democrats.
Okay, let's round the curve toward home here. Kory, sometimes life is just too easy. Okay? Take Stephen Guilbeault, right? You come on this show week after week and tell us what a bad political performer he is, what a deadweight on the federal cabinet he is, and then he walks right into it. People know that some environmentalists don't want to find a way for us to continue to have our lifestyles without ruining the planet. People know that some environmentalists want to use climate change to change everything about the way we live. And Guilbeault revealed himself to be the latter in his remarks last week about roads being a thing of the past. This is hilariously bad politics. If I'd been Lawrence Macaulay, it would have ruined my lobster. So, Kory, go shoot some fish in a barrel for us.
Well, I don't want to see him go anywhere. I think he's like the greatest. I disagree.
Touch that dial.
I disagree with him on all of these things, as we've talked about many times before. He's the gift that keeps on giving for the Conservatives, and he is becoming famous in English Canada to a level that he is in Quebec and has always been in Quebec in terms of being a household name. But unlike Quebec, where you can make a case where he has some currency and is probably a net positive for them in the province, he is a massive net negative for them everywhere else. And as important as Quebec is to the electoral coalition of the Liberal Party of Canada, it is not the only part that is important. And at some point, you've got to wonder how many more times they're going to let this guy go out and step in it. But it's we've got to go back to Marco Mendicino before to find another Liberal cabinet minister who is so ham-fisted in terms of his communication, so tone deaf in terms of the things that he's putting out there for the government, so confrontational with other provinces. Like it's just bad for them. I don't know, what he has on Trudeau that has him willing to accept the amount of political heat and damage he has from this one minister. But hey, keep it going. It's fantastic for the Conservative Party.
Scott Reid, when I watch him do that, and to be honest, frankly, when I see the lobster picture from Macaulay, right, it has to be that when they had the cabinet retreat, they weren't really honest with each other about where they're at and why they're there. And they weren't really honest about what they have to look, sound like, and do differently in order to win. It can't be that they had those frank, honest conversations, because this looks like business as usual on steroids.
I agree. And you look at it and, people talk about, most centralized PMO in history and the way that everything's so tight-fisted, and Katie's the most powerful chief of staff, longest-serving chief of staff, and nobody blinks an eye in Ottawa with that. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily true. This isn't a criticism of Katie necessarily. I'm just saying, I would be inclined, if I were her, to be a lot more, holy fuck, you people, we are hanging off the building, right? with towels tied together. And you're waving with one arm about no roads?
Lobster.
Like, fuck.
Would you like some lobster with that?
So, yeah, I mean, the sense of urgency, like I make this joke all the time, right? But yeah, it is time to panic. Okay, a little panic would do you well. A little rush of shit to the heart would probably serve Stephen Guilbeault well. Now, all that being said, as spectacular as he's just a spectacular boner machine, no question about it, right? And he produces one of these things every 6 weeks. I'm still not convinced in our day and age that anybody, like, I know we get obsessed with him. I know that he makes news and all that in the political class. I don't know that it's like it was 25, 30 years ago. I don't think that anybody in English Canada, other than some premiers and media, actually know who he is. So I still think that there's this brutal, calculation, go back to Kory's point, which is like, well, if I fire him, then I'm definitely going to feel it in terms of a public opinion reaction in the province of Quebec. But suffering through these boners, I don't know that it materially worsens things for them in English Canada. Maybe I'm being too benign. I would certainly go up one side and down the other, but I'm not as. I just don't think he's as water cooler as we with our noses right up to the window pane of politics think.
I don't know about that. What I hear is his name's coming up on doors in Ontario in a way that is surprising, second only to the Prime Minister in terms of people being critical of him. So I think he's getting better known than you think. But I think there are some big parts of their agenda that they want to land. I think one is around climate change and getting a deal with Alberta on carbon capture and storage. Does anyone think that him being involved in those negotiations is making it better or worse? Like, it's clearly making it worse. Like, Wilkinson cannot be happy when he sees this guy walking down the hallway or towards a microphone. Like, it's making all of that much, much more difficult for them. It creates tension in the relationship with virtually every province. I don't think there's anything they can do that's going to have them get along with Scott Moe in Saskatchewan, but he creates a lot of friction in the relationship with Ontario in ways that I don't think are helpful to the Liberal Party or to the Prime Minister's agenda. So, where is the plus? I can see the minuses, but outside of Quebec, I don't see where this math ends up with them in a better position by hanging on to this guy.
Canada's pork industry is a major economic driver. In 2020, Canada exported $5 billion worth of pork products to 93 countries. That makes us the world's third largest pork exporting country. An outbreak of African swine fever in Canada's pig population would be devastating for the thousands of jobs and billions of exports in Canada that depend on healthy livestock. But fear not. At the University of Saskatchewan, they're doing vitally important work. The Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization there, known as VIDO, is developing an innovative new vaccine to protect Canadian pork from African swine fever. This is being done at a world-leading biosafety containment Level 3 facility at the university. Investing in research can ready us to respond to the threats of the future. That's why U15 Canada is a proud member of the Coalition for Canadian Research. The coalition is urging the federal government to support science and talented Canadian researchers with new funding this budget. We have to support Canadian ambition, full stop. Visit researchcoalition.ca to learn more. Jordan?
I mean, as to why they're hanging on to him, I think the only potential answer is Quebec. That's the only thing that makes sense because he is taking on so much water for them. And I think, in truth, they're getting the worst of all worlds because he takes heat and draws a lot of ire from environmentalists who view him as weakening proposed government policies on emissions reductions and things like that. So he's like neither pure enough for a group of environmentalists who would have that as their vote determining issue. But then, of course, on the other side, he is also, he brings out these controversial comments that really, I think are, in a way, it's it's the least politically helpful. It's almost a toxic form of environmentalism that is inherently judgmental about how regular people live. And this is the nut of why the things that he says and how he says them is so particularly dangerous for this government, because it's all wrapped up in this notion of they know better, they're so virtuous, and it demonstrates just
Wilkinson
the deep
just
disconnect.
wants to get me into a different car. Guilbeault wants to get me out of a car.
That's right. And he wants you to
Right.
feel shitty about driving. And
Yeah.
that's just not, it's just beyond not helpful. It's actually, it taps into some of the worst negatives that the prime minister already is carrying and reinforces all of that. And the greatest irony, and I know Kory wants to get in here, so I'll just wrap, but like the greatest irony on this is that in actual fact, like this government has done fairly significant things around emissions reductions. And and I'm not just talking about carbon tax here. They've done a whole suite of other measures that are having an impact. They have a good story to tell. And there is a version of this where they can talk to Canadians in regular, relatable ways that it is not like, yes, we're in a climate crisis, but there's like, we can do stuff. Things are working. It is not hopeless. And like, you can continue to enjoy a quality of life, and we're going to help you do that. And we're going to help you with your pocketbook at the same time. Like there is a version of this that is far more politically useful. But instead of that version, we get a version where you have the optics of a minister who is so deeply disconnected from how regular people live that he wants, like, it's almost as though he wants people to just feel guilty about going about their lives when, as Kory has really, I think, eloquently pointed out many times, there is no fucking other option. Like, I would love, for example, to take the city bus to take my kid to school every day, but I cannot do that because I don't live in a city with a functional, reliable transit system, you know? And there's like a lot of Canadians in the same boat. So I think that in all the senses, this is the harm extends beyond the immediate stupidity of the comment and the concept. And by the way, the fact that that was not a one-off, that was written into a speech. There were staff who saw that and said, like, carry on, which is like absolute malpractice. But it really taps into just such a dangerous narrative for this government. So I don't know if I'm ending on they should get rid of him or not, because I think they're just clearly not going to. But his own goals are of the most dangerous kind for this government.
You made the point I was going to make, which is that it's completely unrealistic to live in the utopia of that Stephen Guilbeault wants to impose on the country. Like, it is impossible for most people living in most parts of this country to live without vehicles and roads and all of that nonsense, which, you know, is part of a radical agenda that he embodies and that he has been a part of his entire career and his entire political, you know, life, both in environmental NGOs and in this government. But it's a radical agenda that doesn't serve the government well, because it's deeply unpopular, because it's deeply radical. It's nuts.
I just want to note, first of all, a little asterisk on your drive-by slamming of my buddy Marco, which was, you know, gratuitous and unnecessary. But I want to note that in all of this discussion, none of you guys are giving Guilbeault any credit for his clarification, and he wasn't talking about all roads. I mean,
which clarification, Scott?
Don't
there
we
were
need
three.
to reorient this conversation around his clarification? I think he tried to make it clear.
We're not on the bridge. We don't have to carry water for stupid comments like that.
Shots fired.
Why don't they make him the Treasury Board minister? Because apparently that is a limbo from which one cannot emit a sound or a visual image, since they put Anita Anand there. So hasn't she served enough punishment that they could keep Guilbeault in the cabinet, but put him in a position where apparently you're kept in a secure, locked location, out of sight?
They could sure use her help right now.
Revenue is a popular choice in past governments as well, I've found. Veterans Affairs, maybe, I don't know. Like, there are a number of penalty boxes of frequent use in
any
Ottawa,
and all economic development, regional economic development files.
Yeah. Anyway, there are other things they could do
Northern
with
Labrador.
Yeah. All right. Let's Gordon Pinson, can you bring this to a wrap for us?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's got a hey you?
I gotta hate you.
Good.
My hey you this week is going out to Rob Oliphant. So Rob is somebody on an opposing team who I, over the years, have come to respect. I like Rob Oliphant. I agree with Rob's comments about the UNRWA defunding. I think it was the wrong move on the part of the government. And I think a lot of people share the sense of just horror and grief and powerlessness that he was expressing in his conversation with constituents. But guess what, Rob? You don't get to muse about quitting because you don't like it. There are literally hundreds of thousands of Canadians who care quite a bit about what's happening to people in the Palestinian territories, to people in Israel, who have strong opinions about it, who are not close to the government. You are a parliamentary secretary, for now, to the Foreign Affairs Minister. And if you hold those opinions, it is on you to express those within caucus. It is on you to express those to your minister and not to random constituents. It's not okay. And it's not helpful. And I think that in that context, talking about quitting because you disagree, I think it's weak and I think it's a cop-out. You have that seat and you should be using it if those are really your closely held beliefs. That's my hey you.
There you go. All right. Kory?
Mine's going to be to Jagmeet Singh. And builds on our earlier conversation. I think he needs to find some new issues if he wants to prop up the government that are in closer alignment with some of the leadership candidates in other provinces for his party, for some of the people in his caucus who aren't going to be in his caucus if things continue as they are going right now, and find a different way to get a win. Like we talked about one, you could demand Guilbeault be removed. That would be popular. You could come up with a replacement for the consumer carbon tax that is going to have emission reductions, but it's going to alleviate pressure on middle class voters and in areas where you're going to suffer big losses. The Charlie Anguses of the world. Find some other issues in which you can define yourself and justify your support for the government that are more on the change side of the ballot question. And I think if he were to do that, I think he would be doing a lot better. So, hey, Jagmeet, maybe relook at that plan.
Interesting. All right, Scott?
My hey you goes out to Max Valaket and PMO Communications. We spent a lot of time the last 6-7 days talking, much of it risibly, about the rebranding of the Canada Carbon Rebate, the CCR, the Bad Moon Rising. And I know that there's been lots of memes and jokes and people like, are they so fucking dumb that they think that by changing the name, we're suddenly going to love it. And now we're going to, and all that kind of stuff. Fair ball. That's going to happen when you do that. I assume the logic of going through that is so that you can now put 40 million, 60 million, 190 million, I don't care, no number's too big, amount of money, dollars, against a paid media buy saying, you're getting this check in the mail, this is a dividend that you're receiving from this government that would be taken away. You would lose this money. Pierre Poilievre would take it. Now, you can't say it exactly that, but go to the limits of what is permissible. And if I don't see that advertising campaign, then I truly, truly, truly am going to drain every bottle of liquor I can find. Because if that's not the logic of doing it, what on earth is going on?
We're here for you, Scott. We're going to start buying now.
Excellent. I endorse that comment 100%. My hey you goes out to old friend Anthony Wilson-Smith and the people at Historica Canada for their most recent Heritage Minute, featuring the great Normie Kwong from the CFL and the Edmonton Eskimos. I think these Heritage Minutes are fabulous things, and they're great vignettes about our culture and our history that everybody can get behind. Tony Wilson-Smith is a great guy who's been running that organization for a number of years, and I am particularly fond of the Normie Kwong one, so I thought I'd give him a shout-out. Anybody hasn't seen it, go see it. It's a very touching story about Alberta in the 50s. All right, that's our show for today. I want to thank all of you who watched or listened. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN, Bruce Power, Aurea, and U15 Canada. Obviously, Scott, Jordan, and Kory, thanks for being here this week, and we'll see you all next week with more of the Curse of Politics. Till then, take care of yourselves.